This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to episode 289 of the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Ariel Curry all about the hungry author mindset. First, to a couple of comments on Douglas Vigliotti's episode. I really loved these comments. Tara said, "This was an absolutely phenomenal episode. So good to hear you both geeking out and having an intelligent, nuanced discussion. Please have Douglas on again." And then Judith said, "Absolutely fascinating episode on so many levels, not least the incentives for men to read. I realised listening that all men I have felt close to have been fiction readers, which is fascinating." So in personal news and updates then, the Kickstarter finished yesterday and it finished on £113,862 British pounds. According to Google currency converter this morning on the, what date is it? The 2nd of April, that was 147,045 US dollars. Fucking hell, that was a lot. I'm sure Kickstarter will say a different amount because especially if you're in America, but yes, so it was a huge success to say the least. That this works is that Kickstarter tries to collect the money from everybody. We had 726 backers, of which on first charging there were 80 errand pledges, which is quite a lot, but not proportionately. It's always usually about 10 to 15% of errand pledges, and Kickstarter basically tries to charge a couple more times. This morning we're already down to 60, so that will start to fall over the next few days. And then the money will get sent out around the middle of April, I believe. It will be around, the 16th, 17th of April, and we're hoping to get the books ordered that weekend with our importers. I have finished the novella, which I'm very excited about. I finished it on Monday, and I feel like I'm sort of falling apart. Like the novella culmination ending with the Kickstarter ending energetically was just a little bit too much. I'm not feeling 100%. I'm not sick or anything. I'm just very, very tired. So a couple of days of going slow and relaxing. Yes, I know. I'm sure you guys are all like, wait, what? I've changed, okay? And I am going to the gym, so that will be fun today. And then this weekend we are hopping off somewhere for a little family trip in the UK to a lovely city, so that will be fun. And then when I come back, it is the school holidays, but I have got a couple of weeks to really pin down and finalise the outline for Architecty. And then in the background, whilst we're doing that, the team will be expanding. So my new lady is starting on the 14th of April. And I am very, very excited about that because it means I can get out of the warehouse or I will be able to once she's had training and everything. Like this week was the culmination of a lot of the pain points that I was in. I have finished all the contracts. We've got all the staffing in place. We're just waiting for one of them to start. I sorted out at the end of the tax year and pensions. I have been getting words. Obviously, I finished the novella. Managed to get it edited. So all of those things that were kind of hanging over me are all done. And yeah, so basically I just feel a lot freer, a lot more tired, of course, but a lot more optimistic for the future. I think I mentioned last time that I've taken the decision to delay the publication of the novella publicly. So the Kickstarter people will get it, but then we're not launching it until February the 14th, so Valentine's Day 2026. The reason for this is that it then buys me the time to complete my goal this year, which was to get ahead of the publishing schedule. And basically my goal now is to write both Architecty 1 and 2 before I go on holiday in July. I think I did say this last time. But anyway, that all of those things combined with that decision really has put me in a much better mental space. because genuinely my goal was to get ahead of the writing. That is not what I was doing by opening a warehouse. However, the warehouse is literally my favourite thing. So I'm, very happy about that as well. In wider things, like I feel like the algorithms have been pretty shite of the last couple of weeks. I feel like they haven't settled back since the blackout, and I know there's another blackout coming. So yeah, who knows what will be happening there, but I am just soldiering on, continuing to push forward and moving on to writing the next books. So I think that is probably it from me, because the biggest thing is that everything is kind of done. We're moving into the fulfillment phase of the Kickstarter, and I am moving into what I have been lusting after, which is the time and space to write, and then to like exercise and read and just sort of be. And yeah, that's where I am. So very exciting. The Rebel of the Week this week is Mark. Mark worked for a newspaper chain, won an award for technical excellence working on a committee that recommended purchasing a chunk of Netscape stock early in the boom. The prize, a trip to Florida in August. So hot and muggy that I couldn't leave the hotel. Random seating at the award dinner, I'm seated with the publisher for the Miami Herald, some high-priced management types, a scion of the family that owns the chain, etc., way out of my league socially. I'm sitting quietly, hoping no one will notice me. One of the people asks the publisher about Dave Berry, a slice-of-life humour columnist, amusingly inoffensive. The publisher waxes lyrical over how great it is to read his column a few days in advance. They are happy to participate in newspaper events, visit children's hospitals, and basically is God's gift to a publisher. Oh, I think to myself, Carl and then Hyacinth, I think, also works for this guy. I have something to talk about. And so I ask about what it's like to work with Carl. The dude deflates like a day-old balloon. That week, Carl had written a column about a commissioner who, during a meeting, accepted a call from a real estate developer in the audience. The developer told the commissioner he'd voted the wrong way, and the commissioner changed his vote on stage. Whoa. Carl is less a gift to the publisher and more an employment plan for corporate lawyers. Our scion, a nice lady a bit on in years, sees I've committed a faux pas and tries to help. She brings up an infamous picture in the San Jose Mercury News of developers at Netscape sleeping under their desks to keep up with deliveries. Isn't that a pity, she asks. As God, as my witness, the only thing I could think of to say was, lady, they work for you. Oh, I love that. If you would like to be a Rebel of the Week, please do send in your story. It can be any kind of rebellion, something big, something small, or something in between. You can email your Rebel story to Becca over on rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com. And new patron this week, welcome and thank you to Nicole Hutton. And a big thank you to my existing patrons. If you would like to support the show and get early access to all of the episodes, as well as bonus content like our Poison and Parlay sessions, which the next one is going to be on Friday the 25th of April at 3 p.m. UK time. Then you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. Hello and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today I'm joined by Ariel Curry. Ariel is a senior editor for nonfiction at Sourcebooks. Along with her friend Liz Morrow, she hosts the Hungry Authors podcast and wrote Hungry Authors, the indispensable guide to planning, writing, and publishing a nonfiction book. Ariel lives in Chattanooga, Tennessee, I think. Hopefully that's right. With her husband.
Yes, that's right.
Good, okay, thank you. With her husband, children, 2 dogs, a kitten, and a beehive. Okay, so before we dive in, tell me about the beehive.
You know, it's so funny. That's always the thing that people want to know about. It was a COVID project. My husband had always kind of had an interest in beekeeping. And during COVID, we're stuck at home and we were like, well, you know what? Let's just try it. There's lots of beekeepers in our area. And so we kind of got a mentor. Someone gave us a little starter hive and we've been doing it ever since now. And we absolutely love it.
Oh my goodness. Have you ever been stung?
Oh, yes. So many times.
Oh, okay. But you get to eat your own honey, which must be amazing.
That's right.
That's so
Yes.
cool. Okay, well, I won't continue to ask you about the honey because that's not what we're here to talk about, even though I do love honey. Would you like to tell everyone a little bit more about your journey? Like, how did you end up where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. I have not had kind of the typical career path to trade nonfiction publishing. So I started actually in academic and education publishing. I interned at an academic press actually in London. And then I interned for a fiction editor and I interned for another fiction imprint. And I was just kind of desperate to get started in publishing. I ended up finding a position as an editorial assistant at Corwin Press, which is an educational professional development publisher. It's a very, very niche corner of the publishing universe. And I was there for about 10 years. I loved it. It was a fantastic place to learn a little bit about publishing, but it's very insular. It's a really small universe. Everyone kind of tends to stay there for the length of their careers. And I really had this dream to publish, the more commercial nonfiction books that you'd find at Barnes and Noble and or Waterstones and all of the bookstores that you love to go to. So I took a risk and I left my job so that I could freelance for a while. And I thought that would be a great way to get more experience kind of in the trade world. So I became a ghostwriter. I was collaborating with authors for a few years. I loved doing that. But then a position became available at one of my favorite publishers of all time, Sourcebooks, and they took a risk on me. So here I am. I'm now back kind of in the corporate, traditional publishing sphere, acquiring commercial nonfiction for Sourcebooks, which is like the ultimate dream job. So I'm very, very happy to be here.
Okay, so I have to ask for selfish reasons. Why was Sourcebooks one of your favorite? Because when I think of Sourcebooks, I kind of put Sourcebooks and Bloom next to each other because they
Mm,
publish some of my absolute fave, like spicy
yes,
romantasy authors. And like, so for
yes,
me, Sourcebooks and Bloom are kind of like an equal footing dream. But why for
yes.
you? Because I don't think of Sourcebooks and think nonfiction.
I know. And it's so funny. But actually, I didn't even know. I'd never read any source books, romance or fantasy or anything, which is now the primary thing that source books is known for, like you said. But I first came to source books through that editor that I mentioned that I interned for. And she was kind of the more historical fiction editor. And so I interned for her. She was amazing. And so I kind of got a glimpse of their historical fiction stuff. And then I got into their narrative nonfiction stuff. So Kate Moore's Radium Girls book that kind of took over. And Kate Moore is actually in your area. She's in Cambridge.
Hmm.
And she's amazing. So she's written some really interesting books for source books. And she was kind of my entree into source books nonfiction. And then I started reading all of their narrative nonfiction. I read really widely across the narrative nonfiction list. And I've just been a fan for probably over a decade now. And so then when a position became available, I was like, I need to hop on that.
I love
So
it. Okay, so
yeah.
you are in an acquisitions role, right?
Yes.
Okay, so like what does that mean? How do you acquire nonfiction? And like what would make you excited about a nonfiction book? And then I suppose on the flip side of that, what would really put you off?
Mm, great questions. So, as an acquisitions editor, I am essentially an investor on behalf of Sourcebooks. So, it's my job to look at proposals for nonfiction ideas. And my area within nonfiction is prescriptive nonfiction. So, I'm looking at books that are really in designed to accomplish a transformation in the reader. So these are self-help books. These are, business books. They're leadership books. They're inspirational books. They're anything that you read to kind of change something in your life. That is prescriptive nonfiction. And that's my area. So books in prescriptive nonfiction are acquired on spec. So an author creates a book proposal. They say, "This is the idea that I have. It's going to be so great. I'm going to sell it in all of these different places, because I'm so great in all of these different ways. Please take a chance on me and publish my book." So my job is to read all of those book proposals and make educated guesses about what I think we could do with those books, what do I think we could be successful with, based on our past experience. I'm lucky because Sourcebooks is a very entrepreneurial publisher, and so we get to take a lot of risks and do some exciting things and exciting projects. And I would say the number one thing that I look for is a great, unique idea. And I know that sounds kind of typical and probably the thing that every acquisitions editor is going to say, but it really is true. I want a book that is going to make me think about something I've never thought before. I want a book that's going to make me care about something I've never cared about before. For example, one of my favorite books is Grayson by Lynn Cox. It's an older book now. It is about it's a memoir. Lynn was 17. She's swimming off the coast of Long Beach in California, and she realizes she's being followed by a baby blue whale, or baby gray whale rather, that got separated from its pod. And it's this memoir about the entire book takes place over like 4 hours that she's swimming with this gray whale and having this like absolutely transformative spiritual experience in the ocean with this whale. And this book has like changed my life. And I don't like the ocean. I don't like swimming in the ocean. I'm not a big fan of the salt and stuff. But let me tell you, I care now about gray whales because of that book. And that never would have happened if if that nonfiction didn't exist. And then, I just learned about a new book, The Modern Mrs. Darcy. She runs the podcast, What Should I Read Next? And she just recommended this book on the history of eyeliner. Again, not something I would ever think about caring about. The history of eyeliner, like I just take eyeliner as I take it for granted in my life. But the way that she described this book and, the reading the description of it online, I was like, oh my gosh, I need this book. Like I need to know the history of eyeliner now. Those are the kinds of books that I look for, that I want to acquire. Something that makes me think about, something that I take for granted that I never would have thought about. And now I desperately need to understand it better.
Okay. So oh, sorry, yes. Go on. No, go on.
Well, I was going to say on the flip side, because you asked what are some red flags. So the red flags are when an author says they have a really great, unique idea, but they don't have a lot of competitive information. And then I can go and find 7 other books that claim to do the same thing, because that tells me the author really hasn't done their research and they don't know their market all that well. And so that doesn't give me a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to contribute something new and really interesting to the conversation, because what they're going to end up doing is kind of regurgitating things that other people have already said. So that's always my biggest red flag.
First of all, did the whale get back to its mummy?
Okay, do you want me to spoil it for you?
Yeah, I need. Oh my God, if you tell me no, I'm going to be heartbroken. You can't do that live on the podcast.
This is a happy story. The whale does reunite with its mom.
Okay, thank God. Oh my God, you really had me worried there for a second. I was literally like, is this a cliffhanger? So I think it's really interesting because I was immediately hooked. And it kind of reminded me of the documentary on Netflix, My Octopus Teacher. I don't know if you've seen that.
Oh, no.
So good. But it kind of had that. So he swam in the same place every day for a year. And it was kind of about the journey and he just basically made best buddies with this octopus. And it was heart-wrenching and wonderful. But it kind of reminded me of that. And weirdly, so I don't normally read memoir. And I decided to read a memoir this year. And it was Viola Davis's memoir. And I think it's the best book I've read this year, like above anything else. It was incredible. Also, I listened in audio, though, because it was her who narrated it. And you can't not listen to her voice. She's incredible.
Yes.
But yeah, absolutely amazing memoir, because I was just, utterly gripped. And the other thing that you said that I thought was really interesting, because I think it's a common mindset mistake that writers make. You said you're an investor. And I just think that is such a cool way, because we as authors are business people and we have to invest in our books. And it is no different, like publishers are businesses. And therefore, any book that they are, in air quotes, buying, they're actually investing in as a product that they want to see a return on. And I feel like that's one of the things that writers don't really get. The minute they finish a book and they have the intention to publish, they become a business person. So I love that. Thank you for saying that.
Yes.
I like it, just like tickled all of my favorite bits in my brain when
Ooh,
you said
yay.
it. So yeah. Okay. Hungry authors. What does it mean? Why is it important?
Yeah.
Why should we pay attention to this?
Yes. Okay. So, hungry authors is a concept that actually started. It was me and a couple other editors at my previous company, Corwin, and we were kind of trying to describe the more ephemeral qualities of authors that we wanted to work with. And we were like, they're really passionate, they're really committed to their craft. They will take feedback and they just put everything they can into making their book a success. And one of my colleague was like, they're really hungry. And we were like, yeah, they're hungry. And so we just started calling them the hungry authors. We're like, oh, we got to find these, hungry authors. And that phrase stuck with me. So then, a couple years later, when I befriended my friend Liz, she and I are talking about, the same qualities of like, how do we help people? Because we were both collaborators and we were both coaching people. So we're like, how do we help authors get that thing? That mindset that they need, that like gumption and the willingness and persistence to keep trying, because the industry is full of people who will tell you you can't do it, especially in the traditional space. There are so many people who will say, oh my gosh, it's so hard. Memoir's not selling, blah, blah, blah. You need 100,000 followers. There's like all these negative stories out there about especially traditional publishing. And we were like, yeah, but we see people succeed all the time. So what is it that makes those people different? It's the hunger they have. It's the drive they have. It's the gumption they have. So I got permission from my colleagues to kind of borrow hungry authors for our own stuff, and we've grown it now into this brand. And that's what a hungry author is. It is an author who is willing to succeed no matter what. We like to say that, the hungry author's attitude is, I'm going to do it regardless. So, publisher, do you want to come with me or not? And let me tell you, as an acquisitions editor, that is a really attractive quality because it makes me have confidence that you are going to do it. You are going to make it successful. And you know what? I want to take a risk on someone who's going to make it successful. So it's a really good attitude to have, regardless of, whether you're traditionally publishing or self-publishing.
Do you think people are born that way, or do you think they can develop it?
Oh, such a great question. No,
Thanks.
I don't think people are born that way. I think that they grow it. This is a capacity that we grow in ourselves. And that's part of why we wrote the book, right? Because we believe this is something that is teachable. And it's not just something that you naturally have. I don't think that I'm naturally a very like hungry or, competitive person or anything like that. And you don't necessarily need competition, but, you know, I
Okay,
would say
wait, let me stop you. Are you saying that
okay.
because you know your Clifton strengths?
um, I do know my Clifton strengths.
Okay, tell me.
My
Tell me,
okay.
tell me.
My number one is input. Oh
Okay.
gosh, it's been a few years. Okay, my number one is input. One of mine is developer.
Oh my gosh, that makes so much
Um,
sense in your role.
right. One of mine is it achiever?
Uh-huh.
And then learner, and I think maximizer.
Okay, so that has a
So
competitive element in it.
yes, it's competitive adjacent for sure.
Yes.
So like there's a part of me that can get, competition can get my juices going for
Do
sure.
you have competition in your turn?
No, I don't.
Okay, okay.
No.
I'm number one competition.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, are you talking about Clifton strengths?
Yeah.
Because people don't normally say like they say competitive rather than competition, whereas competition
True.
means something slightly different to me. So I was like, oh, does she know Clifton
Yeah.
strengths? Sorry, right. I don't even know. We've completely lost track already.
Well, it's something you learn, right?
Yes,
So
that
like
was it.
even if you and I think a lot of authors naturally feel like, oh, well, I'm kind of a shy, more bookish person. A lot of the authors that I've coached and work with are people who like to be kind of behind the scenes. They're like, I want to communicate through my words and not through, or like my written words, not necessarily through being on stage or being the center of attention or anything. I just have this really compelling story I want to share. Or I just have this message I really believe in. And they so many authors are wonderful people that want to put, kind of the thing first and not themselves. But as a hungry author, you need that, but you also have to be willing to kind of do all of the other work. Like you said, being an author is a business mindset you have to have. And hungry authors kind of get that. And they're willing to do all of the other work that kind of surrounds the book itself to make the book itself successful. So it's definitely something you learn and grow into over time.
Okay, so you've kind of mentioned some keywords there, like gumption. One that
Mhm.
was coming up in my mind was like emotional resiliency, kind
Mhm.
of as you were talking. What do you think are the where do people start in order to grow this kind of gumption, for want of a better word, or like how do they start developing a hungry author mindset if they aren't number one competition, for
Mhm.
example? How do they, yeah, what are the base tenets?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, the basic tenets. So, in our book, we've kind of have five things. So, the first, component or tenet of the hungry author's mindset is what I mentioned before, which is kind of I'm going there. I'm doing it regardless. Do you want to come with me? That mindset is honestly the fundamental thing. Like, you have to be willing to say, I believe in my content. I believe in this idea. I believe in this story so much that it needs to happen regardless of the outcomes. So, I'm going to do it and I'm going to take this risk and I'm going to invest first in myself. And then when you invest first in yourself, other people want to invest in you too. The second part of it is traditional publishing is not the only way. So we see a lot of authors who kind of have this mindset that, oh, I have to be traditionally published or I'm not successful. And of course, we know that's not the case at all. In fact, traditional publishers are looking at self-publishers now to say, where are you? Just like Bloom, you mentioned, the source books list Bloom, that's the whole business model, right? Is all these self-published romance authors who have done incredibly well. Now Bloom is partnering with them to bring their books to retail. So publishers are very aware that self-publishing is actually where things start in a lot of cases. And so as a self-published or as an author, self-publishing can be a great way to test your ideas, see what works. It's really easy to sell something on Amazon. It's really hard to sell something in a bookstore. So Amazon is a great testing ground for your ideas and your books. And you can iterate so easily. I mean, with all the self-publishing options available through like KDP, it's so easy to test ideas and figure things out as you go. And that mindset of like, I'm going to just test things and try things and I can start with self-publishing and it's fine and that works. The third thing is I have a plan for success. So I know we're going to talk about book maps. We believe strongly in making a plan for success, and that success does not happen by accident. We believe that, the greatest authors have a plan and they execute on that plan. So you've got to have that. The fourth thing is that I'm open to feedback and willing to change my plans. So, kind of that adaptability and flexibility is really key to being a hungry author. And then the last thing is this is just my first or second or third book. I will write more books. And honestly, if I could, publish a new edition of Hungry Authors right now, I'd probably change that to each book is practice for the next book. So every book you're doing is just you're getting a little bit better at what's going to be the next book and you're iterating on your ideas. And that's what you see in all the big authors, right? Like let's say Adam Grant. You see like the seeds of all of his ideas in his previous books. Authors like Daniel Pink, all of the big nonfiction authors that you see topping the New York Times bestseller list all the time. They have been doing this for a long time, usually. And every book that they put out is some kind of iteration on probably a previous idea. Malcolm Gladwell's a really great example of this. So,
That's really
yeah.
interesting. I now all my money comes from fiction. Before, all my money came from nonfiction. I literally, in the last
Mm.
18 months, did a complete 180. But when I was writing nonfiction, the next book was usually sourced in a single chapter from the previous book, which is so interesting that you say that. I never really noticed that, but that is definitely how my nonfiction ended up being written. So that's fascinating. And
Yeah.
funnily enough, if I had have written another nonfiction book, it would have been based on the last kind of chapter in the previous book. So that's so funny. Um, okay. Are there any kind of differences between nonfiction and fiction in terms of hungry authors? Or is everything kind of the same across the two?
I mean, the process is typically different. There are narrative storytelling elements that you need to know for fiction and for narrative nonfiction and memoir. And there are more logic-based models that you can use for structuring your book for prescriptive nonfiction. But I would say, the mindset is the same no matter what. I
Okay.
think that's definitely a universal component.
Okay. What is a book map? You mentioned that whilst you were talking a moment ago. And how can we use one to help us?
Yes, for sure. So, a book map is a visual depiction of your book's content. That could be a traditional outline. Like that's what we kind of all learned in school, or most of us learned in school back in the day, was to make an outline. And it feels very boring, but actually, no matter how you do it, having that place where your thoughts and ideas are on paper and you can, especially for prescriptive nonfiction, where you can see the hierarchy, that's really, really important. But however you've, decided to do it, you could also do, a brainstorm map or some kind of, thing with post-it notes. Like we've got pictures on our Instagram and on our website of, us doing book maps with post-it notes or on really giant sticky note sheets of paper. You can do it any way that makes sense and feels right for you. What matters is that you're getting your thoughts and ideas around your book's content out onto the paper and then, or the page, it could be digital too, and then arranging them in a cohesive narrative if you're doing memoir or narrative nonfiction or fiction, or you're organizing it again according to some kind of logic if you're doing a prescriptive book. So when you create a book map before you start writing, it acts as kind of a roadmap to get you where you're going. And it's all about the transformation you're trying to accomplish. So a book map is really saying, where am I starting with my book? Where am I ending? And then how am I being really thoughtful and careful and conscientious in how I guide the reader through each step and each chapter of my book to whatever that final transformation is. And I think that, that reframe to transformation is a really key mindset shift for a lot of authors, because a lot of authors are just like, I have this thing I want to say and it just needs to be said however I need to say it. A lot of authors kind of start down in the weeds and we like to kind of back them up. I think that's another thing that a book map does, is it helps you see, the 30,000-foot view at one time to say, here's where I'm going and how I'm getting the reader there. Because you have to remember, the way that you pour it out is not necessarily the best way that the reader is going to experience it. So sometimes if you're a discovery writer, you do have to kind of pour it out in your own words and in your own way and in your own organization first. But then you can do a book map to say, okay, now let me look at this from the reader's perspective. Is that the best organization that makes the most sense for them, that creates the best reading experience for them? Everything has to be about your reader all the time. That's how you're going to sell books.
I completely agree. I the thing I used to bitch and whine about the most whilst writing nonfiction was the structure, because you have to get the structure right. And of course, story structure in fiction is important, but it seems to be like the spine of a nonfiction is critical, and if it's wrong, like it just dies. So I really love that. I never made a visual map though. I was like very chaotic. I do not write my fiction anything like the way I used to write my nonfiction, but I would write all over the place. And then it was only in writing all over the place that I would mat things together and then I could move them and put them in the right places. But anyway, um,
Yeah.
so for nonfiction authors, how important is like a platform? So, I am your typical TikTok author for my fiction, but what matters in this day and age? Is having a platform important? How on earth do nonfiction authors build a platform? Do you have to be an air quotes expert in order to be picked up as a nonfiction author? Yeah, talk to me about kind of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because everyone in publishing has a different opinion on this. So that's that's hard. It's hard to find, a lot of consensus around platform. But I will say, it depends on what you're writing. Like you mentioned, fiction, the platform expectations are completely different. For nonfiction, there is a higher expectation that the author will come with an audience of some kind. So that I'll say that. And I would prefer the term audience over platform, because platform, a lot of people kind of assume that means social media, But audience can come from a lot of different places. It could come from your newsletter, it could come from your speaking engagements, it could come from the bylines that you have under your name on, national publications. It could come from a lot of different places. So as long as you have an audience and you can kind of come to the publisher and say, look, I know that when I put this idea out into the world, I can get it in front of these people's eyeballs. That's going to make a publisher pretty happy. If you're trying to write something where you are giving advice, like if you're writing a book on skincare, let's say, I will expect that you are an expert in skincare, that you're an esthetician or you're a dermatologist or you've got some kind of credentials. And that's also part of your platform, is whatever credibility you have. If you're giving advice that's a little bit more just like lifestyle advice, then the platform expectations are probably less. Like, I don't really expect that you have credentialing as a life coach necessarily, but I'd like to see that you've like done some real things. So there, it kind of depends on what you're writing about, and what you're, trying to convince people of, because your credibility really matters in the nonfiction space. So I definitely think expertise in the thing you're writing about helps.
So you've worked with a ton of authors. Like, what patterns have you noticed among those that have a career? Like, the people listening to this podcast typically tend towards indie publishing, and most of them are hungry for a long-term career. So yeah, like, what are the patterns? Because I feel like, so I've been in this industry. I first published in 2017 and I kind of started writing in 2014. It took me a little while to get that first one out the door, but I have seen a lot of people come and go. So, like, and I'm sure you have as well. Like, I'm sure it's the same in traditional publishing. But what are those patterns from all those authors that you've worked with? What is it? I mean, other than gumption,
Yeah.
what is it that keeps somebody in this business?
I really think it's a commitment to their craft. Like, I've seen a lot of prescriptive nonfiction authors who write books, basically just because they feel like they should, or because they're doing all this speaking and they get asked all the time if they have a book, and or they just feel like it's kind of the next thing that their business needs, is they need a book, but they're not really in it for the book. They're in it for the speaking. They're in it for the, growing their brand and their business. The ones that have long-term careers usually have been writers already. Often I find that they were writing in secret and they didn't have a lot of confidence about that.
I
They were
love
like,
that.
I know, they were like, I've always dreamed of being a writer. I just didn't really think I could. So I went into this other career. And now that I have expertise in this new thing and I really have something to say, I'm coming back to writing. And those are the people that I find, those are like my favorite people to work with, because I know that the book that they're working on is the fulfillment of this long kept, dream that they've had kind of tucked away in their hearts. And they're going to be really open to feedback. They're going to be really, excited and motivated to work on it. And they're probably going to have more ideas that they come with, because once you unleash them and grow their confidence a little bit, those are the authors that are like, I want to do it again. I want to do it again. And so that's the pattern that I see. And those are the authors that I just love working with.
I love that. Are there any kind of common mistakes you see with newer nonfiction writers?
Yes, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see is trying to move too quickly. So I'm sure you see this all the time, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I see lots of people in the book world saying, "Oh, I'll help you write your book in 30 days, or let's use AI to write your book in 6 weeks, and we're going to put together a book and on some crazy fast timeline." And that just always scares me so much, because I'm like, how the ideas need time to percolate. And really, it's not even the idea itself that needs time to percolate. It's how you frame the idea that needs time to be finessed. So how you position that idea in such a way that it's going to attract people's attention, that takes a lot of time to get that positioning right.
Oh,
And when
love this.
authors rush it, it does not work. When you like race a book to the finish line to get it out in time, it just almost always falls flat. And again, it's really just at that point something to boost your ego and, make you feel good about yourself, which, whatever, there may be a place for that. But it's not the kind of book I'm interested in publishing. I
So
want a book that is going to put a really interesting idea out there in the best way possible. And finding that best way possible takes time. I almost always find that when authors say things like, oh, well, I don't want to traditionally publish because it takes too long. I'm like, you probably need to traditionally publish. Like that tells me you might be rushing things. So I love the long timeline of traditional publishing because it forces authors to put more work into it. And I think that almost always makes the product better.
So I find this really interesting because I'm one of those authors that writes really quickly. However,
Uh-huh.
I will have a book in my head for weeks, months, years before I get to the page. And then when I get to the page, that's
Mhm.
like just vomiting the story that has been in my head for 6 years. So like I kind of like I understand what you're saying. And the other thing that I was going to say is that um it was really interesting talking about that framing because that's how I used to think about my nonfiction. So with my fiction, I can't start until I know the skeleton from A to Z. What is like the plot, the conflict, and the emotional line. I literally
Yeah.
words will not come out. The minute I have that, even if it's a small outline, I can get the story out because I've done all the mood boarding and the notes and the reading and all the visits and all the rest of it. With the nonfiction, it was always, I always had to understand what was it that I'm saying that's different to everybody else. So my first book, my first nonfiction book was How to Write Villains. And I just couldn't get it out until I understood what it was. And basically, it was the tagline that came to me. And it was like, your hero's not the most important character in your book, your villain is. And that was
Mm,
like a really controversial statement. And as soon as
yes.
and obviously I was being like provocative by saying that, but the point was your villain drives all the conflict. And so
Yeah.
that was then the thread, the kind of like golden thread that like went through the book. So I completely understand what you're saying. Like, and I suppose it comes back to what you were saying earlier on, which is like having that unique idea as well. So yeah, I love that. That's such good advice.
Well, I
Um,
love that example. Can I just comment on that? I mean,
yeah.
that's a beautiful, brilliant example of a really catchy commercial idea because it catches people off guard and it kind of takes an assumption that most people make and it turns it on their heads. One of my mentors, Jeff Goins, he is kind of brilliant at positioning things like that. And so we quote him in our book and we kind of share one of his ideas or ways of framing ideas, which is he has this kind of sentence frame, which is everybody thinks X, but the truth is Y. And that's kind of what
Oh,
you did. Everybody
yes.
thinks your hero is the most important character in your book, but the truth is your villain is the most important character in your book. So that's a perfect example of the kind of positioning we're looking for. And of course, that sentence frame is just one way of finding that right positioning. And there are lots of ways to find it, but that's just brilliant. I love that.
I also kind of feel like if you don't have that, you don't know how to market the book. And if you don't know how to market the book, you cannot invest because you cannot sell. And so
Mhm.
like that, that's why I start with that. Like I cannot even outline a book unless I know how I'm going to sell it. So like I just love all of
Yes.
this. Like you're really making me think. And I love the fact that I write or have written nonfiction and fiction because you're making me think about what I do and kind of giving it that framework and structure. So I'm like all excited and buzzed
Yeah.
now from this conversation. So thanks for that. Um, okay, one kind of like last big question before I ask you the ultimate podcast question. What's the biggest piece of advice you would give to listeners who need help developing the hungry author mindset?
Yeah. I love this question. I would say start small. Remember we said before that the hungry author's mindset and, just having that gumption and that determination is something you grow in. So don't feel like you have to have it. And if you don't have it right now, then you're not going to be successful. I would instead ask yourself a question like, what can I do to take a little bit of risk today in my writing? Or what can I do to embrace one of those five tenets that we talked about? How can I maybe just brainstorm my next book? If I'm, hyper focused on this book, maybe I need to spend 10 minutes thinking about, well, what might a next book look like, just to kind of reorient your brain to like, this book I'm working on now is practice for the next one. So that's my biggest advice, is just like start small, work your way up into it. You know, being hungry is something you grow into for sure.
I love it. Well, this is the Rebel Author Podcast. So tell everyone about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Okay. I think the most rebel thing that I've done, even though, to be honest, I didn't really feel like a rebel at the time, but I think it was quitting my job. Like I still am a little bit blown away by this now, that I quit my job in the middle of a very successful career. I had been, recently promoted. I was kind of on track to promote again. And I had a great career trajectory in front of me. And I just kind of had this like little voice inside me that was like, yeah, but this isn't really what you want to do. And if you stay here and play it safe, you're going to keep doing this for the rest of your life. And it's not a bad life, but it's not the life you want. And I just had this little voice inside me that was like, now's the time to do something different and take a risk on yourself, invest in yourself. And I am so, so glad that I did. I just, owning my own business was an incredible experience. Getting to collaborate and work really, really closely with authors for a few years was, some amazing relationships have come out of that. And just growing in my own confidence as a writer. Like, I don't think I could have written Hungry Authors if I hadn't taken that risk, because I didn't have the confidence until I started ghostwriting for other people. And other people, I borrowed their confidence. They had confidence in me first and asked me to write their books. And I was like, really? You think I can do this? And they were like, yeah, of course you can do this. Write my book proposal, write my book. And it was when I started saying yes to other people's confidence in me that then I grew the confidence in myself. So maybe that's another takeaway for listeners too.
I love that.
Borrow other people's belief.
And if in doubt, get a mentor who will believe in you. I think that,
Yes.
that helps too. Oh, I have thoroughly loved this conversation. And I'm going to go back and listen to this, because you've really like got my brain like thinking all about kind of how I frame things and marketing and all that good stuff. And we didn't even really talk about marketing, but that's still where my brain has gone. But anyway, would you like to tell everyone a little bit about where they can find you, your book, and anything else that you want to add as well?
Yeah, sure. So the best place is hungryauthors.com. So there you can find information about our podcast and the book. I also do a newsletter on Substack. So if you want to follow me there, it's arielcurry.substack.com. And those are definitely the two best places. Most of the stuff I do, outside of source books is for Hungry Authors. So that is the best place.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And of course, a giant thank you to all of the show's listeners and all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. I'm Sasha Black. You were listening to Ariel Curry, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. I'm talking to Laurie Puma all about why good writers get stuck and how to break through.
Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.